Hello, this is Srinivasan, and in this session of the series of sessions on HTML5, we are going to take a look at CSS and its features that we are going to use to create styling effects for the HTML file that we had created as part of session number 1. So in this particular session, we are going to take a look at all the features, have a deep understanding on it, and in session number 3, we are going to apply the same for the HTML file that we had created in the session number 1. The current version of CSS is 3. In this particular session, we are going to take a look at this various features that is provided CSS. CSS Selectors is one of the one. That's one of the concepts that we are going to take a look. And the various properties that are provided by the CSS that we will be using to tailor document. As part of the CSS selectors, the various selectors that we are going to take a look is dot and then hash and then element based selectors and then star. And as part of this second part of this particular session, we are going to look at the various properties provided by the CSS. Some of them are display, padding, margin, float, clear, and position. These are some of the properties of CSS that we are going to take a look at in this particular session. So let's start exploring each one of them through examples. So as covered in the session number 1, we will be having the doc type declaration at the very beginning of our HTML document. We will be linking our HTML document with the CSS file with the link tag. Trail is one of the attributes of the link tag, which specifies the type of relationship between this document and the linked document. And href is another attribute of the link tag, which specifies the name or the path of the CSS file that we need to include in this HTML file. So let us now have a div tag with a particular class. Now to identify this particular component in our HTML document, we use the concept of CSS selectors. Selectors are patterns, are nothing but the patterns that are used to select your set of components or elements in your HTML that you want to style. So in this case, in our style.css, we will specify through the dot operator the particular component that we want to style. And apply a text color to the HTML contents or the text contents that exists in the middle of the div tag. So this way we apply styles to particular components with a particular class by using the dot operator. In the case of components which are having IDs instead of classes, you can identify the same using hash. So now in this case, you will observe that still the same style has been applied, as we have identified the particular component with the ID sample in our cascading style sheet through the hash symbol. These are the first two primitive way of selecting particular components in your HTML document. The third variety of selectors that we can use in our CSS selectors is the element based selectors, wherein, assuming that we have two different paragraph tags in your HTML document, and we would like to style only the paragraph tag that is inside the div tag, what we could do is have a component based styling wherein we specify the paragraph tag that exists within the div tag and specify a color for the same. Now in this case, you will observe that the text within the first paragraph tag has been styled, whereas the text within the second paragraph tag has not been styled because of the component based styling selector that we have used. The fourth variety of CSS selectors that we are going to take a look at is the star. In the case of star identifies that all the components of your HTML document has to be selected for styling. So let us assume that we have used star. You will observe that all the components of your HTML document is being selected to apply the styles. This covers the set of CSS selectors that we need to use in the session number 3 to style the HTML document that we created in the session number 1. Coming on to the properties that we'll be using from the CSS to style our HTML document, it is a display, padding, margin, float, clear and position. These are some of the properties that we will be using from CSS to style our HTML document. A display. A display is the property that specifies the type of box that is used for an HTML document. It has various values like the inline block. These are some of the values that can be applied for the display attribute. So let us see in this case as to how to apply the display attribute. Let us assume hi. We have a text wherein it has I. And we have a div over here. And to style the same, we'll be using the component based styling mechanism wherein we specify the tag name of the component that we want to style. So let us see as to what kind of a box has been used in the case wherein display is inline. In the case wherein the display is inline, the contents, that is HTML5, is displayed as usual. That is, it is displayed along with the text that preceded it. So let us now change the value of the display from property from inline to block. And in this particular example, you will observe that HTML5 will be delivered as a paragraph tag in itself, so that it follows in the next line. This is one of the properties that we'll be using in our session number 3 to style our HTML5. Followed by display attribute is the padding attribute that we will be using. The padding attribute defines the space between the element border and its content. The padding clears an area around the content inside the border of an element. The padding is affected by the background color of an element. So let us take an example wherein we have two div elements with two different background colors. And a text between the same. So let us now see, without application of any of the styles, how our page looks, and then apply the styles. Now this happens to be the default structure of the page without applying any of the styles. Now that we are going to take a look at the padding property of the CSS, we'll try to style the div elements of our HTML document. You will observe that the padding property of the CSS increases the space between the border of the element and its inner contents. So as you reduce the value of the padding, you will observe that the space between this line and this text is reduced. This is the impact that is gotten by the padding property of the CSS in comparison to the margin property, which brings in space between the components of an HTML document. You will observe that the margin property of the CSS increases the space or decreases the space between the components of the HTML documents. So as I increase the space, you will observe that the space between these two elements increases. It applies to all the four sides of the component. The next property that we are going to take a look at from CSS is the float property. The float property specifies whether or not a given component should float. The various values available for this option is none, left, right, initial and inherit. So in this case, you will observe that all of the components that are part of the HTML document will float on your right hand side. First being the ABCD, followed by the another div element 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we will try to float those two elements on the left hand side. So similar effect is given on the left hand side. So if you don't have any of the float properties listed in your styling sheet, then the default appearance is the way the components appear in the document. Followed to the float property is the clear property, which is very much related to the float property itself. The clear property specifies on which sides of an element where floating elements are not allowed to float. So the various values applicable to this property are none, left, right, both, initial and inherit. So let us take the same example to apply this particular property. Let us assume that we have a table with some contents within it. So now let us see what will be the impact to the document. And also let us have the float property to the div elements to be aligned on the right hand side. You will observe that the table is now brought on to the left hand side in alignment with the div tags, with the two div tags. Let us rename this contents. To cell 1 and cell 2. Now, if I don't have to have my table in alignment with the div tag, then I should specify a property, something very similar to the counterpart of the float property, which is clear property. And in this case, your table is brought down of the div tags. That is basically the clear property defines that there should not be any link to this component and to any other floating components that are available in this particular page. Finally, we are going to take a look at the position property of our HTML document. The position property specifies the type of positioning method that will be used for individual components in your document. It can be static, it can be relative, it can be absolute, or it can be fixed. And in this particular example, we are going to look at a very simple example on the fixed part. Position giving fixed. Fixed, the meaning of the fixed value for the position property specifies that it will be positioned relative to the browser's window. So in this case, we'll give a value for the top and the right attribute, and observe what will be the impact to the table. Now you will observe that the table has been brought down here with respect to the browser's starting point, which is this. This is how fixed will work, wherein it will not be relative to any of the other components that is rendered as part of the HTML page, whereas it will be relative to the browser's starting point. This is how we can position our components in our HTML document. So in this particular session, we covered the two aspects of cascading style sheets, CSS selectors, and the various properties that we'll be using in our CSS, and then use the same to implement styling to our HTML document. In the upcoming session, we are going to take a look at how we'll be using all these features from CSS and define styling for our HTML document that we created in the session number 1. Thank you.